Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Urban October event, where we will be discussing how to rebuild safe, sustainable, and resilient cities after the COVID pandemic. So my name is Yulia Lapina, and I'm the International Outreach Coordinator. And today we will hear from 13 of the GPODS Fellows. Their bios will be circulated, so I am not going to present each of them individually, but I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes to talk about the Global Policy Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship, which is a program for public policy practitioners, business practitioners, energy and climate change experts, entrepreneurs, academia, members, scholars, and strategic analysts. Our fellows are from 5 different countries and are experts working in the field of public diplomacy, policy, and sustainability. They are mentored by 30 experienced professionals from 14 different countries, and mentors include Assistant Secretary General of the UN, judges, diplomats, political officers, and come from all over the world. So the format will be as following. We have about an hour and a half, and we have 3 topics to discuss. We are going to talk about how to rebuild cities that are safe. So the first topic will be safety and equitable access to healthcare. Then we will move to resiliency. And then finally, we will talk about sustainability. So I will introduce quickly the first topic, which is safety. Over 50% of the global population live in cities, and they are expected to cover about 70% of the population by 2030. This is why it's so important that cities are planned and prepared to meet the opportunities, needs, and challenges which come with it. The pandemic this year helped highlight our vulnerabilities and widening inequalities. So this is a wake-up call and an opportunity to build back our cities in a safer and more inclusive and equitable way for all. So I will now leave the floor to the fellows. Guys, you have about 2 minutes each before we start a discussion.
Sounds good. My name is Caroline Rakos-Wojciechowski. I will be discussing the state of public safety in the context of COVID, examined through the lens of healthcare in marginalized communities such as Venezuelan migrant women and homelessness. So the social determinants of health that place minority communities at a greater risk from the pathogen are struggling in poverty with limited job and social mobility, working frontline jobs with lack of adequate personal health care access and protective equipment, PPE. Also just general public transportation, pharmacy, grocery, and warehouse distribution needs. Living in crowded apartments and just overcrowded shelters as well, where social distancing isn't possible. As well as the self-rationing of healthcare as a strategy. It's just not applicable in a lot of these urban environments and slums around the world. The other thing that I will be focusing on is, as I said, Venezuelan migrant women, and they are caught in between a situation where their original healthcare system of their home country is not adequate to meet the needs and expectations of COVID-19. So they historically have been migrants to neighboring countries such as Colombia, but because of the restrictions on equal access to healthcare as well as other universal human rights in Colombia, it becomes a precarious situation for these migrant women who are looking for safe jobs, who are trying to avoid gender-based violence, which unfortunately is very frequently occurring over there, on top of not having that healthcare access and are actually, in most cases, forced to return home to Venezuela. And during this pandemic, it's not good. And generally, also, women are key players in building back better, especially in the COVID response. And they have been the ones on the front line. They have been the ones who have been administering the healthcare needed to the people in their communities. And so they are not only putting themselves at risk, but also their families more at risk. So through a discussion on this, I hope to explore that a bit more, and we will go from there.
Yeah, my name is Sahid. We're focusing more on the problem of equity and accessibility to healthcare systems, which is worsened by COVID-19 pandemic. It's from recent researchers that shows that the issue of lack of healthcare is no longer as much a problem than having access to unsafe care. From the recent study by Krohn, it shows that out of 9 million people that were investigated to have died, about 5 million people of them are actually those who died from unsafe healthcare. And this is really, really disheartening, coupled with the impact of COVID-19. And also, according to WHO, from the report that was released in June 2020, it was asserted that about 3 billion people do not have access to an hygiene, and 70% are from the urban area. So these are key issues which we need to really, really talk on when we want to rebuild our city to make it more better. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other presenters?
I am there. Hello. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and I'm going to talk about urban mobility to create more equitable cities. So we know that the world is not an equal place, and this crisis just showed us the mirror. Most cities around the world are created around center-periphery model, which means that places that are more connected or located near desirable areas become more valuable. While some have a choice of where to live, many others just end up residing where it's possible. This puts people under constraints like being away from essential services or work or even recreational activities. This is why urban mobility is important for social inclusion and access. Currently, we're facing two sides of the issue. One is to promote public transport system, which in such times when social distancing is the need, and then plan it sustainably in the long term, and reduce pressure of increased ridership and revenue and job losses whose run public transport system is currently bearing. For example, Brazil lost almost 1 million RAL daily, or some Chinese cities saw splurging rise in car sales, which had other negative impacts. And of course, you have nearly half urban residents in the world who lack access to public transport.
Thank you. And our last speaker for this topic.
Hi, everybody. I am Sulekha, and I'll be adding the disability lens to this topic. So to the earlier statistics mentioned, I'll add a few more to contextualize the issue. So of 66% of the global population that is projected to be living in urban spaces by 2050, 15% of them are going to be people with disabilities. Currently, as many as 80% or 800 million persons with disabilities live in countries of the global south. The largest urban growth is expected to take place in India, China, and Nigeria. And people with disabilities comprise 20% of the world's poorest, including in high-income countries such as United States, where they make up 47% of those living in poverty. Now, even under normal circumstances, 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide are less likely to have access to education, healthcare, livelihoods, or to just even participate and be included in the community. They experience high rates of violence, neglect, and abuse. They are more likely to have poor health, and while having disability probably doesn't by itself put you at a higher risk of infection, many persons with disabilities do have specific underlying conditions that makes diseases more dangerous for them. Now, needless to say then, access to the disabled is at the heart of building safe, resilient, and sustainable communities. But one of the bigger issues that we are facing is just the idea of disability itself, and that is what I am going to address. Disability is not a homogeneous concept, and most disabilities tend to be invisible. And this is recognized by the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which highlights that along with the physical impairment, it is the attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinders full and effective participation. This has been recognized by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that aims at not leaving anyone behind. SDGs have 11 references to persons with disabilities, and it is also at the core of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, countries such as India have launched campaigns such as the Accessible India campaign that are nationwide flagship programs. However, such initiatives remain very few and far between, and they have very limited impact on the ground. For example, in October 2017, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing highlighted that housing for persons with disabilities has largely been ignored by legislative and policy initiatives globally. So I believe that it is a very important facet that needs to be introduced and talked about. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much to the speakers. So now I want to open the discussion. So you guys have about 10-15 minutes to solve the problem of how to create more safe cities after COVID. And I would like you really to focus on thinking it through the lens that the pandemic is obviously a horrible crisis, but what opportunities emerge from it, and how we can think about this as actually a window of opportunity to create safer cities. take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to look at it from the lens of not reinventing the wheel. There's some countries that have actually done some, put up a lot of leadership programs and a lot of policy programs that have shaped the direction of how safety can actually be ensured in our healthcare setting. I would like to look at a case study of Cambodia in Thailand. In Thailand, in 2018, the government actually set aside a social security program that also provide an health security for the 1/5% of the urban poor. And it is called National Health Equity Program. And in this equity program, it comes with two facets. Number one, it's helped to guarantee the health security of the people of the 1/5% of urban poor and the poorest of the poor in the country, and also help to empower the hospitals and the district hospitals with equipment, with facilities that could aid them in attending to the urban poor. And this has actually helped even during the COVID-19. In Cambodia, about 5 reported cases were what was established in some of the national statistics. And covering that has helped a lot because people can have access to go straight down to the hospital to get attention and of course to have access just like the rich of the rich in the city. And more or less, there was a publication which was also aside to that. According to NIA claimed that in this publication, talking about the protection of the poor, it said that the poorest of the poor were able to have access to facilities that actually allow them to be able to treat themselves and deviate them from going to the non-medical services that have claimed close to 30% of lives in recent statistics. So this case is actually a case I wish government or other countries could actually study and could help them build their country much more safer, make it much more safer and for all. Another case I would like us to look at is the Bhutan case. It was said, according to WHO, that 70% of people do not have access to hand hygiene. And of course, out of the 70% of the people that will not have access to that do not have access to hand hygiene, we have 50% of them are in the urban pool, in the urban centers. And of course, in the case of Bhutan, Bhutan has 40% of the population not having access to hand hygiene, and of course, as well as people in the district healthcare system. So what Bhutan did was to establish innovative and hygiene facilities and as well as water treatment facilities together, which actually help people to have access to hand hygiene. And this also covered the issue of COVID-19. And it's a recent program, lauded program in the country as of now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are very well said and done, but those are addressed through the context of COVID. Yes, COVID has elucidated those problems, but we need to be building back better and thinking more long-term. So in the case of addressing the poorest of the poor, I was actually looking at the Care for Homeless organization under the New York State, New York City Department of Homeless Services that falls under the Department of Social Services. They are championing healthcare solutions as well, because CFH delivers primary and behavioral, which under that includes mental health and substance abuse services to the homeless and their families. So in areas where there are large cases of overcrowding and some sort of mix of sheltered and unsheltered homeless populations and the poorest of the poor, as you were addressing, it is also important to consider a holistic approach. So for example, this particular program utilizes a patient-centered medical home approach, integrating the primary and behavioral care services needed across 15 sites in New York City and has earned high recognition by the country. And their programs offer adult and pediatric primary care, mental health, behavioral health, HIV services, health education, LGBTQ+ services, oral health care, podiatry. They offer all the services across the board and partners with the Institute for Family Health. So here we have, again, the public-private partnerships to provide services across Manhattan to the homeless individuals who are otherwise fearful of utilizing the emergency room in the context of COVID. And as such, they should be. But however, these homeless and poorest of the poor populations also have a lot of risk factors and underlying health conditions that then contribute to their exposure of risk and risk of contracting the disease as well. So it is important to consider that in this context. And I think in addition to making these programs accessible, I think some other successful practices have been creating advocacy training programs. So again, CFH does this, where they create the training programs so that civically engaged citizens can speak and make presentations to policymakers at all levels of government on this issue. So I think that's very important. Also engaging nurses and healthcare professionals. I know they are overwhelmed now, but in the future, moving forward, as we build back better, recruiting some of these healthcare professionals. In Copenhagen, for example, a project called Project Social Nurse has dedicated nurses with knowledge of specific health issues and problems in relation to treatment systems. They're helping drug users in the homeless population to complete treatment in hospitals, and at the same time work in liaison with regular staff to diffuse conflicts and coordinate treatment. And also in London, Dr. Nigel Hewitt started providing healthcare for homeless people in a general practitioner setting, and has set up those services in university college settings. And now there's exploratory questions of whether we should be bringing it to the streets. So there's a lot to consider there as well. I also think with the recent discussion from the UN World Data Forum, participatory data collection is essential, because right now a lot of these reports that we are seeing on homeless and the poorest of the poor, they are estimates because we don't have that data on them. We don't know exactly how many individuals have those underlying risk factors or have contracted, because again, they are not seeking the attention they need. And I know this isn't about, building affordable housing. That's, one of the future ones, but that also plays a role in healthcare as well, because these facilities need to be equipped with the basic needs, and not a lot of them are. So for example, sanitary conditions to use the toilets, they don't even have soap sometimes. So we need to be providing these general practices. We need to enable these general practices to prevent COVID, and let them occur and equip them to occur in these homeless shelters, or just, make public spaces more equipped to handle the homeless population that is in need of these basic services, such as washing hands and just data communications in general on best practices. So that's a lot. I will let someone else speak now, but those are just some of my recommendations that I've seen.
Thank you, Caroline. So what I'm hearing is a focus on the poorest of the poor, and take the equipment to them and make sure that it's safe and accessible.
And making them feel safe when they receive it, because that is another thing.
If I may quickly add to Caroline's point about we need to think about how to build back better. And she's mostly nicely addressed all the issues that the disabled also face in terms of access to health services and sanitation. But what we also need to keep in mind that access to information forms a very big part of making this happen, and which is not possible owing to a number of disabilities. For example, I'm sure all of us here have attended a number of webinars, but in how many have we actually seen an interpreter, a signed interpreter for anyone? For a person who is impaired of hearing, to be able to access this information or to be able to participate in it. So I think the idea of inclusive thinking actually needs to also form part in the way we build back better.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sulekha. And adding to Caroline's point, how important public health is. Access to public health is something which very much comes under access to urban mobility. And it's very important to, since we have already discussed that half of the world, urban people living in urban areas don't have access to a public transport system, it's important to work on that. So this is a good opportunity for us to really promote the BRTS system, which is the bus rapid transit systems around the world. And also, along with that, we've seen in a lot of European cities, in New York and other cities in the world, how public spaces are also being converted to cycling lanes and walking grounds. So that is something essential. But talking about shortening the distances, we have to come back again to the point that it is important that public transport system needs to be promoted, because otherwise the distance won't be covered. So for example, we could start with the basics, like investing in good quality infrastructure for that, and also just modernizing the existing systems. For example, in Kigali, Rwanda, we can see that they're providing free Wi-Fi, which is a very big thing in the African countries in general. Or currently with the short-term measures we can see during the COVID crisis, because that's how you build in the current crisis, you know that the world, the public transport system has been discouraged. But going forward, we have to plan on it. We have to build the trust again that it can be used, which we have seen around the world with the Delhi metros opening up, or even in cities where the metro systems and other buses were actually the forefront of the frontliners in going from here to there. It is very important that these things are just the basic precautions can be taken. For example, in Bogota, Colombia, they have removed the essentials such as the carpet and seat covers, which reduce their time of sanitizing these things. Or the technology can be a very big enabler. For example, in Auckland, New Zealand, an app has been developed which tells you before a bus or a train arrives if there is a space of being socially distant within 2 meters. So along with technology and correct awareness, I think that urban mobility can be developed, and of course with government support, because you need to pump in funds. For example, in Jakarta, we've seen that there is such a huge number of informal public transport system that such around 80% drivers were lost their income during the COVID crisis. So it is important that policies are framed around these things and urban mobility is promoted.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to quickly mention some things that were just discussed. So we definitely agree that there has to be a particular attention to the people who are the more vulnerable, particularly the homeless population and the population of persons with disability. We need to make sure that they have access to public health care and that they feel comfortable and safe. And this could be achieved by either bringing it to them or by creating a public transportation system that encourages to use it. And obviously also all of this need to be backed by information that is accessible to everyone. So if we should come up with a solution to sort of like incorporate all of these elements, how do you say we could do it?
Yeah, like I said at first, I said it will be important to actually be able to set up funding that is going to be able to cater for infrastructural development, which of course happened in the case of Cambodia that I actually shared. And of course, we need also to be innovative. Like in Cambodia has a very small economy, but they were able to develop innovations that were able to like cater for their needs, which is very, very much important. And second is orientation. You need to orientate the people concerning information. You have to provide information to them so that they will be able to understand what is going on, and they'll be able to know what exactly is at stake and how they can be able to participate. And that could actually show under citizen science, where community are the center of programs.
Exactly. And I don't know, at least in the case of Colombia, it's interesting to see that, yes, they have these international checks. They are part of these international organizations where they have to meet the minimum core requirements to fulfill the standards for healthcare as the international organization, as Sahid said. And part of this is delivering information, education, and communications mechanisms. But they are doing that for the healthcare systems and not always for migrants in particular. That must also be stipulated. They are still seeing this outflux, this flowing out of migrants going back to Venezuela because the other conditions are not being met. So to Sahid's point, absolutely, we need to invest in public-private partnerships some more. We need to partner with government structures of all levels, the international, the national, the state, the local. And we also need to engage the citizens who are global citizens who are these servant leaders who are doing the participatory data collection and working with the people on site, including non-government organizations and interested parties. But also we need to, as Sahid said, incorporate them and communicate with them better, because right now the systems are not very good, because obviously we're seeing these issues of people returning to more dangerous situations of healthcare and more precarious environments instead of staying in a relatively stable healthcare system. As we know, in Colombia, the sexually gender-based violence incidences are very high, and those issues are putting women at risk, and those issues are still making them vulnerable and not providing them with that healthcare system that they need, because there are no systems in place to address that. And it is a cultural norm, and it is not even being addressed outside of the migrant situation. But I will let one of my other colleagues take the floor.
Yes, and just to add to, oh, sorry.
No,
go
please
ahead,
go.
Arundhati.
I would just
Sure,
like
just
to add.
Okay, Arundhati first and then Suleika.
I'm sorry, I think it's a lag in the internet. That's why the confusion. So I would just like to add that we've discussed this before, how important the partnerships are. I think it's very important to pump funds going forward in urban planning and development, because these cities are made for citizens. They're the key components, and the cities are planned and developed by the public funds only. So it's very important that everybody has equal right and access to all the services which are provided. It's like,
just to add to the point of funds,
So like, I think you're breaking up.
As far as the
So like, can you hear us?
Concern, it just makes economic sense. Am I audible?
Now you
Hello?
are. Can you hear us? Yes? You broke up for a second. I would say we can try it again. And if not, if the audio still lags, you can just drop it in the chat and I will read it.
Sure, I will drop it in the chat because it's unstable, the internet connection.
Okay, sounds good. So this is going to be our last comment for this session. So it's my understanding from your brilliant discussion that everybody more or less agrees that the biggest point on which we should focus in order to build safer cities after COVID would be partnerships with local and state organizations, and particularly communication, so that outreach to the most vulnerable populations is ensured. So like, I don't know if you want to try, if you want to comment on this, or if you want to drop a comment in the chat.
Can you hear me? I'll quickly drop
Yes.
quickly. So just apart from the funding aspect, as far as the disabled are concerned, it just makes economic sense. For example, cities that depend on tourism often face an opportunity loss of an estimated 15 to 20% of the global market share, just because they exclude tourists with disabilities. And just upgrading the infrastructure usually comes at mere 1% additional cost. So just even inclusive cities just make even more economic sense. And that's something that we can look forward to.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, we are slowly transitioning into our second topic of the day, which is building resilient cities with a particular focus on urban governance. So resilient cities are cities that have the ability to absorb, recover, and prepare for future shocks, would those be economic, environmental, social, or institutional. Resilient cities also promote sustainable development, well-being, and inclusive growth. To increase their capacity for resilience, we believe that cities will need to adopt urban planning and building design strategies that allow them to increase their abilities to better respond and adapt to the economic, social, and physical stresses that they will face as they confront the challenges of increasing energy scarcity, climate change, and population change. So with that said, I will leave the floor to the fellows. You guys all have 2-3 minutes for your initial comments and remarks, and then we will get into the discussion.
you so much for this opportunity. I would actually like to use the comments of Sulekha as a perfect segue into the resilience aspect of it. Again, she was talking about the inclusivity part of the cities. Now, looking at it from a governance lens, what we need to realize that in the current context, right, especially when an pandemic like COVID or any other emergency hits, right, we need the most vulnerable are the urban poor. Now, why I say so, that even in the best of times, their access to health services is limited because the localities that they live in are generally not very well served. Then basic infrastructure, and I talk not only in the context of India, I talk in the context of South Asia also, and many other developing nations of the world, we can say global South, that basic infrastructure like piped water, proper sewage lines, road, all of that, and mobility also is kind of missing. And this gets further exacerbated when there is an emergency situation or a pandemic or an epidemic hits, or there are natural disasters. Then the third aspect is that mostly for the urban poor, the livelihoods, right, are very vulnerable. And the slightest of shocks tends to disrupt it. So the urban governance needs to plan for all these three challenges, especially taking care of certain very vulnerable within the vulnerable, like for example, women and people with disabilities. So that is what we'll cover more when we discuss further. So I'll pass it on to other fellows for their opening comments.
Thanks, Shashank. Hello, everybody. I'm Malika, and I'll be talking about migration caused by climate change. So COVID-19 basically highlighted the existing inequalities we've been ignoring for the longest of times. So this became increasingly evident when COVID-19 induced lockdowns left migrant laborers all around the world stranded and without jobs because of the lockdown. So, according to an informal international labor organization research done in over 20 countries, it was expected that millions of migrant workers were expected to return home due to loss of jobs and unlivable conditions where they were working. So, and in many ways, COVID has also given us a segue, a little window into what migration can look like in the future. If this is level 5, the climate migration that we can expect in the future may be level 10. So research shows that mass migration due to human-induced climate change has been increasing. The UN World Migration Report, released in December 2019, and I quote, says that many more people are newly displaced by disasters in any given year compared to those newly displaced by conflict and violence. Experts say that by 2050, more than 200 million people will be forced to flee their homes due to floods, forest fires, failure of crops, shortage of water, extreme heat caused by human-induced climate change. This is already happening in countries, and we can see in countries like Guatemala and Mozambique. Also, the lawlessness that is attributed with mass migration has also been observed to give rise to activities like extremist groups, illegal activities by like human trafficking, etc. So if international organizations and countries alike don't join hands and start preparing now, the sheer magnitude of the migration would have the capacity to make existing systems and institutions collapse. So yeah, and I think we'll just take it forward with the recommendations.
Thank you, Malika. Hi, everybody. I'm Niveta Biswal. So I'll be speaking about water resilient cities post-pandemic. So my first opening statement is like, during this pandemic, 1.17 million people have died. And this factor has once again highlighted of the water crisis that has been ongoing since years. With recent climate changes or urbanization or migration issues, this issue is going to get more stronger in the coming years. The very simple fact that washing your hands can save your life was a luxury for many people. talk about India or talk about many other countries like Africa or Cambodia, which are already reeling under water stress, people simply did not have the luxury to wash their hands with a simple soap and water. And 7 to 8 times washing your hands was a big issue for them. This deadly virus has once again highlighted the human beings about the disparity that exists between your water consumption and the water availability. And if I talk about pandemic, there have been issues of waterborne diseases like cholera, typhoid, or diarrhea when 3.4 million people, especially children, have died because of that. Isn't it a scary figure? It is. So today I'm going to speak about why water is one of the important resources. And yes, it is. It's a basic fact of a survival and economic good. And post-pandemic, how this issue or crisis is building up and what we need to do now. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Shrija. Thank you.
Thanks, Nivedita. Hi, everyone. I'm Shrija here. So I'll be briefly speaking on the need to build resilient cities. I think that is very self-explanatory in the sense when we say building back better. So the virus transmission, as we have seen, the zoonotic transmission has occurred mostly, and it's according to research reports and various statistics, right, occurred mostly in densely populated cities, be it in our own example. The Dharavi is a bigger sort of a model where you have where the transmission spreads so rapidly. But I think cities, with the better infrastructure, which could be in terms of health, social infrastructure, better financial networks, green infrastructure, also other forms of access to services, they were more kind of resilient, I would say, or they're more kind of equipped to deal with the spread of the crisis. So I think this itself shows that why you need to have the infrastructure in place. When we talk about resilience, it's a very broad, overarching concept. And as taking a lead from the previous discussions we already had about building a safe city or a greener city, I think these all ties into why you need to have a resilient city. So when I say you need to have a resilient city, which includes, all sorts of facets of building a city better. It could be your infrastructure, it could be your services, it could be your social network, it could imply the city itself. So I think, so I'll just, hand the baton back to Yulia for us to sort of dabble on this and come up with some recommendations.
I obviously did not unmute myself before I started speaking. I apologize. Yes, so I've heard some excellent points. I've heard talking about mobility, migration, the water crisis. So as previously, I want you to think about COVID as obviously a challenge, but also as an opportunity, and what could be some solutions to create a more resilient city post-pandemic.
Sure, unmute.
Shashank,
unmute.
So Yulia, I seconded you. I also start speaking without unmuting. So, meaning talking about, essentially, I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about how the COVID pandemic really impacted the urban poor, as I was saying in my opening statements. Firstly, the livelihoods were completely disrupted, and disrupted is an understatement because many countries underwent severe lockdowns. So people who basically earned on a daily basis and consumed on a daily basis were completely left with no means at all. Then, since the cities in most developing nations and definitely in South Asia did not have any plan, right? That, okay, if there is a set of people who seasonally migrate. So I for the benefit of the audience, right, the term migration, right, is in many developing country contexts, it is seasonal also, where people from rural areas migrate to urban areas for a certain period of the year, primarily to earn livelihoods, and then they migrate back. So there is no plan. There was no plan on how to kind of cater to these people when their entire livelihoods were disrupted. So they were actually forced to literally walk back hundreds of kilometers, and many died on the roads itself. Then the access to healthcare, meaning it is n number of studies are there which talk about that access to healthcare in general was very limited in these urban slums or for the urban poor, but that also was completely disrupted because the entire focus was on COVID. But being on COVID did not mean that simple problems like tuberculosis went away, right? So the entire attention went to just COVID alone, whereas the morbidity due to other diseases is actually much higher as compared to COVID. Now, what do we do about it? Yes, there are problems aplenty. Firstly, the cities need to plan for shelter, food, and healthcare, not only for basically a pandemic situation, but in many places, like my colleague here, Nivedita is here, one of the states in India, Orissa, has planned beautifully for cyclones, right? So the highest category of cyclones, they end up with zero casualty. So it's about the urban governance and how you plan for such events, and you learn from your experience from COVID and build back better. Secondly, there needs to be a dedicated fund with urban local bodies to support building back of the livelihoods. Because these livelihoods, these are not small and medium scale industries that banks will give them loan. No, they will not. The local government representatives have to be empowered to help at the local level with small micro loans to help these guys get back on foot. Now, it is also something that anything that is done needs to be done with empathy and dignity, right? Because ultimately it is the right to cities of the urban poor that needs to be reclaimed and reestablished after the COVID pandemic. Because I would want to make a statement here. Actually, it is the urban poor who subsidize the rich and not the other way around due to their services. So that is something that I would want people to kind of take key takeaway from there. So within the vulnerable, there are further vulnerable sections which I want to kind of just highlight. We need to be gender sensitive because women within the vulnerable are extremely vulnerable. Then the second category is children. They have special needs. In order to plan back better, we need to plan specifically for them. And lastly, many colleagues have said disability, people with disability, because a large percentage of urban poor have disabilities or some form or the other. So we need to be able to help them with that. So with those points, I think if the urban governance focuses on those, I think we'll be in a much better position to build back post COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Shashank. And I just wanted to thank you for bringing empathy and dignity in the conversation as well.
Thank you.
Who wants to follow up on these points?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll go.
Totally.
Yeah. So just building on to what Shashank said, I believe that the key to finally being ready for such crises is robust policy, because it's always better to be safer than sorry. So the institutions, our government institutions, international organizations all need to start looking at climate change not as an emergency, but as an adaptative process where you understand that, okay, these changes are happening slowly and you must build policies and procedures and mechanisms and get mechanisms in place which enable you to be able to be ready, like Shashank correctly said about the example of Orissa. So for the highest degree of cyclones, there are no casualties because now they know that these cyclones are going to happen and they're ready for it. But likewise, we also need to have other mechanisms in place to make sure that such casualties don't happen in the future for other situations as well. Another point or recommendation that I would like to propose here would be, like a lot of people talked about public and private partnerships. I would just like to pitch one more idea about a public, private, and people partnership where all the stakeholders of the society are involved in a very integrative process of rehabilitating people who have been internally displaced and the migrants who might come and by crossing borders. this essentially creates a sense of accountability to the people also who are living, because in a lot of situations it has been seen that people living in the slums fear eviction because they don't own the houses they are living in. So if we involve them in the very process of building these rehabilitating houses for them, they will also feel that, okay, yes, this is where they belong and they can live and they own the space. So that way, it will be a more inclusive process for them as well. I would also like to say that organizations like International Organization for Migration have a very, very integral role to play in this, especially when it comes to climate migration, because we need to classify migrations that are happening right now, apart from conflicts as well. So there's a treaty called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. But unfortunately, the problem with this is that it's not legally binding. So states are not binded to actually work towards migration and have policies in place to deal with this problem. So we need to have policies and we need to have mechanisms in place that hold our other countries accountable as well to accommodate migrants and rehabilitate them. So, yeah.
Thank you, Malika. So, Shrija, where are you speaking?
Yeah, because since I would be speaking on the climate resilience, if it's okay, can I go next, or it's?
Is there something, is what you're about to say directly related to what has been discussed?
It's connected to, right. It's a precedent to the above discussion, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I think both my colleagues, both Shashank and Malika, sort of brought out the necessity of having a system of network or the governance structure in place, and they also talked a bit about infrastructure and adaptation. So on this note, I think one point I would like to focus on is, if we kind of scale up financial investments in building green infrastructure. For instance, there's been a lot of policy discussion and clamor about building green infra or green jobs. And I think though a lot of discussion has happened mostly in the policy space, but in terms of practices, we have not seen much of an initiative on that front. So I think I would just like to quote an example from a place in India. Like, for instance, Gorakhpur has actually a grassroots model, model for grassroots activism, where they have developed ecosystem-based adaptation action to develop climate resilient models. And, by doing this, they've actually ensured, livelihood security and empowered the farmers in residing in both the peri-urban and the informal settlements. And they have also, included a lot of climate resilient methods, which would address, problems such as water insecurity, food insecurity, and other sorts of climate change crises. I think besides, for us investing in the green infrastructure, which is the need of the hour, if you are looking at building a climate resilient model, I think one more thing is when we talk about resilience, I think a very important part is also building a knowledge infrastructure or a data or a modeling model. So, for instance, Rwanda has actually partnered with researchers to develop a very innovative pooled testing mechanism. So if you have a accurate and proper representation of the confinement and deconfinement measures in the city, and that could again take, that can be made possible through consultation, through partnerships with private equities or with agencies, organizations, through various modes to get data and to get data which is verifiable and which is something which could be which we could utilize for building services, because data has been a very contesting issue, and we could see that from the G20 summit about the need for digital taxation and equalization levy and everything, right? So data has been a very hot topic in that sense. So I think we need to have accurate, verifiable data for building, good infrastructure. And the third point, or the third recommendation, my takeaway would be, if you could devolve, and I think it similar ties into Shashank's point about him mentioning where he said that local bodies has to be granted more autonomy in case of, taking decisions. So when this entire WEF project about how localization actually boosts better response mechanism or better recovery methodologies, because local people are attuned to understand and address to the problems which are predominant in the areas. So I think a lot more could happen, if the central government, and there's a better center-state coordination and a center-state local coordination in terms of devolution of funds and giving them greater autonomy for them to invest in building a robust, recovery mechanism. UK has done that through its Coronavirus Act of 2020, where it's granted, autonomy to a lot more states. So I think it's kind of a model we should probably look forward to adapting or including it. Thanks.
Thank you, Shrija. So taking a cue from your recommendation like local community and partnership with the government, that is something which I'll be speaking in the recommendation part. But before that, I want to highlight two key issues or two examples related to the water crisis that happened recently during COVID. Talking about from India, Rajasthan had a very difficult situation during this COVID crisis. The state had to face the crisis, water crisis, and then there was the issue of the heat. So all three at one time, and many poor people did not have water to wash their hands. Again, speaking of Bundelkhand, a region in Rajasthan, which has 5 households sharing one tap of water. So imagine the situation when people have to go for a simple drinking water or hand washing. And even we speak about India, which is currently ranked at 46th rank of water stress index all over the world. This also reminds me of a global case in Haiti, which also suffered from water scarcity issue during pandemic. Haiti, a small country in the Caribbean, which has been already dealing with water scarcity issues during the time of COVID, when more of the rural population is not getting water. They have the issue of sewage, contaminated water. So people had a panic amongst them how to deal with the situation. During that time, UN Water, World Bank, and the Haiti's national water body, they together combined to put up water stations for people to wash their hands, and even started campaigns against to how to curb the pandemic. So now the question is that scarcity of water has been a long time debating topic. We know the reasons has been discussed ample number of times, maybe of non-recycling of water or leakage of pipes, or talk about wetlands shrinking, or talk about encroachments happening, migration in cities, urban cities. With a population of more than 68% about to live in urban areas within the 2030 or 2050, as UN says, how we are gonna solve this big crisis which is going to be thrust upon us. So my what I want to suggest is that this issue has been before the pandemic also. Talk about the recent Chennai water crisis, or in 2018 when Cape Town went dry, but the country bounced back with their policies like rationing of water and also applying measures of water conservation to a water fulfillment country. So 80% they are into water fulfillment now. So before concluding, I want to give 3 or 4 key recommendations. First being, as we all know, there's a 1986 Environment Act policy, which speaks about conservation of rainwater and harvesting in rooftop. This thing has been discussed since years, but I find none of the cities or states taking this seriously. Conservation of rainwater harvesting and letting the groundwater recharge. Second is that industries, they utilize a lot of water. So what I feel we can start that industries should have their own captive water plants, and so that their water is regulated and they do not take water from outside. So that may help us to have a control on the unregulated water going on. Third is I would like to speak about digging of the rivers and building of canals, which has already been going dry, and microcredits or micro transfers of money which can be given to poor people or slum area region who can start investing in pumping of water, hand pumps, and water harvesting also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to wrap up, there are some common points that I've heard came across the different discussions and recommendations. I just wanted to point them out before we move on to the next session. So I've heard that some of the common problem is that governments and countries have not prepared for in the situation of pandemic, but even previously to other crisis situations. So one of the part of the solution would be to just plan in advance for what could go wrong in the future. I have also heard, same as in the first conversation, talks about building networks among different players within the government, with the private institutions, with the local and international ones. And I have also heard about empowering individuals in different ways, not just giving loans or credits to corporations and organizations, but also thinking about the single people who need to rebuild their own lives. Okay, so with that, we will move into the third and last topic for today's discussion, which is how to rebuild sustainable cities. So in the past decades, sustainability has been marginalized as an environmental issue, with economic growth reigning as the sole indicator for global development. It is important to note that the human economy exists within the social sphere, which further exists under the overarch of the environment. The current pandemic had made it evident, even to a limit, that the world is in a system of complex interconnections. There are estimated more than 827,000 viruses in the animal kingdom that are a potential threat to humans. The likelihood of such spillovers increase whenever we lay roads through the wilderness, clear forests to grow crops, catch wildlife for food, or pen chickens and swine in places where bats and wild birds can mingle with them. Safer and resilient cities inevitably bolster the prospect of sustainable urban futures, but valid only when we avoid overshoot and collapse the Earth ecosystem. There is no better time than post-COVID-19 to leverage an approach that operates within the limits of planetary boundaries. And I would like Sneha to please kick us off in this.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. So with that, I feel that the COVID-19 pandemic, it's not a crisis of the city, but the crisis of a certain kind of city where the most devastated are the poorer neighborhoods. And it definitely forces us to see the connection between both disease and insanitation and social policy and economic stability. It definitely debates the question of working class housing in the society, where we are debating between bad housing and very expensive housing. Besides, better housing will mean better health for the workers, which is possible with government intervention. And as I welcome these fine thoughts, the sense of deja vu is unmistakable, where I feel it's really important to put public health above private profit. And a broken system needs to be fixed from the ground up, which would mean a well-funded public healthcare system. It would mean a universal public distribution system, as I feel for too long the development authorities across countries have ignored the adverse impact of densification and deplorable health and environmental conditions on people's lives. And definitely the COVID-19 pandemic has compelled us to critically review various long-term measures with an objective of bringing about significant change. And hence, today I'll be generally going ahead and talking about the redevelopment plans of housing and definitely clean energy and air, how important it is going forward from the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you, Sneha. I think I can go next. So I'm Sharmi, and today I'm going to be talking about affordable and clean energy. So access to energy is actually a twofold problem, where on one end of the spectrum, 1/5 of the people still do not have access to electricity, according to United Nations SDG report. And on the other hand, 1.2 million people in China have premature deaths every year due to overexposure of carbon emissions. So the thing is, global economy has been relying on fossil fuels since many years because it is the cheapest form available to us. But it also leads to greenhouse gases, global warming, and environmental degradation. So I think COVID has also proven to us that it's really important for all of us to have access to clean energy and to clean air. Because I think people with lung related problems and other diseases are at a higher risk of contracting the disease, and it also makes it more difficult for them to recover. Hence, we do need clean air. So, now to bring this entire solution, as experts have mentioned in the past as well, renewable sources of energy are the solution. And I think they've been working really well in European countries such as Iceland, Norway, Spain, etc. And today I'd specifically like to talk about wind energy, which is the second largest non-conventional form of energy. And 24% of the world's renewable energy comes from wind. Since I know it is working and it's been working really well in European countries, however, I'd like to shed some light on how we need to make it more sustainable in a developing country like India. So, as we all know, that farming is still the largest occupation in India, and many people rely on their daily income through farming. However, unlike other European countries, these farmers own really small acres of land and rely on cultivation for their income. As we all know that large wind turbines and these windmill farms require acres and acres of land to create windmill farms, and they need to be away from the city because skyscrapers in the city would obstruct the wind. So, in order to actually create these large farms and these large windmill farms, a lot of space has been taken away from farmers. So, I think initially when farmers agreed to build wind turbines, they only agreed because they thought a particular portion of their land would be used. However, when farmers sold this land, they did not realize what the adverse effects of wind energy would be, because the top layer of soil technically became uncultivable. So additionally, the groundwater tables are also being depleted in those lands due to the conductors that pass through them. So in Europe, it's a very different scenario because out there people own large acres of land. And if they have to give a certain amount of land, it is possible for them because that land can be used for cattle grazing. But in India, where people own really less land, when they're relying on that for their daily income, the question is, how do we make it more sustainable for them? How do we introduce more sustainable forms of energy, but also ensuring that it's not at the cost of another person's income? So yeah, this is what I'd like to talk about. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to address the issue, the challenges, and the way forward for infrastructure and the built environment. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, buildings are responsible for roughly 1/3 of global energy use and 1/5 of global greenhouse gas emissions. Here, I would like to quote United Nations Secretary General Antonio, his statement on infrastructure development, wherein he stated infrastructure investment will be crucial. The world should adopt a simple rule. If big infrastructure projects are not green or sustainable, they should not be given the green light. Otherwise, we'll be locked into bad choices for decades to come. So I really want to propose recommendations wherein we initiate systemic changes in the planning, design, and delivery of sustainable and resilient infrastructure and the built environment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. Okay, there we go. We have one last speaker.
Thanks, Celia. Hi, everyone. This is Shivangi, and we're reaching the end of this session. And towards the end, I'd like for us to go back to our roots. By that, I mean nature-based solutions for our cities. One, these solutions already exist. We don't need to innovate. All we have to do is let them do their job. Two, they are cost effective and require little to no investment. Three, they serve more than one purpose. Mangroves and wetlands. They are our first line of defense against flooding and sea level rise. IUCN estimates $57 billion as flooding damages averted by mangroves alone in China, India, Mexico, US, and Vietnam each year. Rivers. Cities like Philadelphia, Mumbai, Delhi all used to have important rivers flowing through them. Now they run dry and we have infrastructure or garbage in place. Where does excess water overflow during flooding? Into our homes. We need to revive and rejuvenate these rivers and floodplains. Trees. Trees, when properly placed around buildings, can save energy by reducing the need for air conditioning by 30% and for heating up to by 50%. But a research report says that US cities are losing 36 million trees a year. So protecting and increasing nature around us in cities improves air quality, mental well-being, increases our resiliency to climate catastrophes, and is beneficial for biodiversity to thrive. Sparrows in India over here are already disappearing. This brings me to another problem. Apart from everything else, our cities today, I believe, are a communication and imagination problem. Google the word city. I did this while preparing for this discussion, and go to images. The first 10 images are of skyscrapers, devoid, absolutely devoid of nature. This is what decades ago we had imagined our cities to be, and that is what we have become right now. When we think of urban cities, the image that comes to our mind is skyscrapers, fancy flyovers, cars, concrete, people hustling. And this is the image that needs to change. To end, while we are building back better, we need to reimagine, revisualize our cities, and amplify nature based solutions because they already exist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, let's again think about how we can make use of the current situation and build a more sustainable and environmentally friendly city after the COVID-19 pandemic.
I feel one such matter that would require critical review and change is the state of housing that is intimately intertwined with the state of health and quality of life, particularly as the millions of working class people and daily wage earners who live in the slums, the 80 to 100 square feet, one room houses, they are squammed and crammed with at least 6 to 10 people who live together. And what I also feel that, with the current situation, when the pandemic came into, the idea of social distancing in these congested settlements is indeed a tall order. And it should be realized that a given land area can have many more small houses, therefore more number of people, than the number of bigger houses that would be possible in the same land area, having lesser number of people. Therefore, in the larger interest of justice and equality, it is the numbers of people that must form the basis of the redevelopment or the development strategy for land use and housing. And the concept of FSI, again, I really don't feel it's coming into play much because this is the current state. And I would go ahead and probably be something that, the FSI should be discarded, as a dignified housing forms definitely an integral aspect of sustainable healthcare infrastructure. Again, I also remember that during the pandemic, when the government ordered to take the vehicles off the street, millions of people, tweeted and said about how they could see clear skies and how the pollution has definitely gone down. So overall, I think that, it's really important that, with the COVID-19 stimulus packages, we are going ahead and starting and jump-starting the economy while also contributing to a sustainable future and mitigating the climate change impacts is definitely important at the same time.
Thank you, Sneha. Who wants to follow up?
I think I absolutely agree to what Sneha said. And it was actually beautiful during the COVID pandemic when the city actually shut down and you could see the skyline. Additionally, I'd like to take cue from what Shivangi also mentioned about reimagining cities. And I think there are 2 or 3 countries in the world that have been really successful at doing that. So first, I'd like to take an example of a new city which is being built in Tempe, in Arizona. And the name of that city is Cul-de-sac. And the city only has one rule. The rule is that you are not allowed to own any vehicle. So all of us assume that if you own one car, it's going to take one parking spot. But actually, Cul-de-sac has proven to us that one car in the city occupies 4 parking spots. And more than 50% of the surface area in US is actually covered in pavements for parking. So I think this is a new city that is actually proving to us that we can survive without transportation. And what they're doing is they're trying to create it in such a way that everything that you need, be it your school, theater, mall, restaurant, is only 5 minutes walking distance away from your house. So this is a new city that is being reimagined. I'd also like to go 20 years back in Freiburg in Germany, where they actually made it very difficult for people to own cars. So there's still a city that has 5,000 people living in it, and they've created it in such a way that it's an entire walkable neighborhood. And the speed limit out there is only 3 miles an hour. So you'd rather walk or cycle than using a car. And these are cities that are being recently built. What about a city where we do not have that much place to, really create new things? I think we can take inspiration from Singapore in that case. What Singapore has beautifully done is with Gardens by the Bay, which is also the biggest tourist attraction right now. They've actually created an entire garden, which is really eco-friendly. And because it's so beautifully built, it's built on solar panels. All the electricity coming in that garden is from solar energy. What they've done is they've also building the country's economy through that. And another example is also an hotel out there, which is known as Park Royal. And what they have done, this is in Singapore as well, they've created a hotel and they've inbuilt rain sensors within that hotel. So every single time there's rainwater harvesting takes place. They have solar power panels on the terrace to ensure that there's no electricity being used. And they also have light saving measures within that. So I think we can take inspiration for the new cities that are to be built. We can take inspiration from a city like Cul-de-sac or Freiburg. And for cities that already exist, we can think of how do we adapt them further in order to become more sustainable.
Yeah, so coming back to what my fellow friends have said, I want to make it. I want to propose that the green buildings and green infrastructure become the new status quo, wherein it is not seen something as a novelty, but is something that is implemented nationwide in order to achieve sustainable urban futures. So in the case of infrastructures, we have Institute of Sustainable Infrastructures that have laid down quite a comprehensive framework for infrastructures called Envision certification, wherein that addresses infrastructure on the basis of quality of life, resource allocation, natural world, and climate and resilience. And coming to the built environment, I think it again comes to the green building certification that has remained a premium thing to buy into the construction industry. But I think like the way forward is to have it included in the building design codes and policies. And so I want to touch on a few action points that could address our building designs for the future. And so one of the things I would mention is net zero buildings that need not be anymore that should become the new normal. And things like smart thermostats, high performance windows, green roofs, and low impact development must be leveraged with nationwide policies and pushed to conserve energy and water. So nevertheless, I would like to mention like the way forward and the success here on can be ensured by regulations, rebates, and incentive programs in a very targeted approach for to cater to the local needs as well as regional needs. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Palash, Charmi, Sneha, and everybody else. Adding to what I said before and what the others have, the number one recommendation that comes to my mind is education. In terms of even built on infrastructure, because I use India as an example. Architecture colleges in India, they don't teach climate change as a subject. And if you're looking at our future built infrastructure to take this into consideration, it is very important that the future architects and the future designers of the world are taught the impacts of climate change. that in terms of what Palash said, again, education to make people understand the importance of biodiversity, to make people understand the difference between short-term and long-term impacts, because we as people, we tend to look at development projects as a very short-term goal. So to understand and distinguish between short-term and long-term impacts. Yeah, so no, the third recommendation I had was what Charmi said about green energy. I think we need to look at this and using a systemic lens and to understand how, even if you're trying to incorporate a good solution that is wind energy, what its negative impacts could be. So not looking at a problem in its in a silo and looking at it in a systemic lens. That's about it. Thank you.
Yulia, you are on mute.
I need to stop doing that. I will just keep myself unmuted because I like to start speaking in when no one expects me to. So I just wanted to touch base on some things that I've heard from all of you. And actually, I would love if somebody of you could elaborate a little bit further on these concepts. So I've heard a lot about reimagining cities and building particularly housing in a more sustainable way. So I would love to actually hear from maybe a couple of you to be a little bit even more concrete. And Palash, I know you came up with some examples, but maybe if we can hear, we can hear from other fellows something very, very practical on those topics.
Who wants to take it?
Yeah, go ahead, Shwan.
Right. So I will share one example on reimagining cities. This I heard by from Mary Robinson, who was asked this question on communication, and she mentioned that climate change is a communication problem because when we think of the future, we think of an apocalypse. We don't know how to visualize the future away from an apocalypse. That is what I mean by reimagining cities, because what comes after climate change has happened? Do we have the capacity and the capabilities to, imagine a transformed world where we have succeeded in implementing these solutions and reversing the impacts?
Charmi, I think you just did my same mistake.
What Shivangi said, I think it also comes from a behavioral problem. So I think one thing that behavioral economics has really pointed out is that it's very difficult for a human to differentiate between their present self and the future self. So going back to the communication problem, every single time we talk about climate change, we talk about and we communicate it as if it's a thing that's going to happen in the future. And that's why people don't feel the present impact. So I think one thing that we need to start doing is we need to communicate it in a better way and make it visible to people that it already exists. And second thing that we need to do is we need to stop giving information. So again, going back to the behavioral lens, there have been multiple case studies that have proven that only giving information to people is not going to bring out a change. So we need to think of it from a different lens where we actually make them feel the impact of climate change and hence move forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, they hear someone.
Yeah, I would like to bring a new impetus to Reimagining City. I would like to see a way of reimagining city as a way of reimagining our governance system, as a way of reimagining our disaster risk approach, as a way of reimagining our strategies as well. And of course, with this element, we could be able to restructure our financial capabilities, like setting up equity funds, our playbook, pandemic playbook, because there was an instance in the United States where a former previous government actually put up a pandemic playbook and the current government felt it was not enough or had to eradicate it and felt this is not. So it is a case of our strategies need to be continuous, and it has to be continuity in government and also continuity in terms of operational capability of our government, and not a government is out and another government felt what was done previously was not important. And also there needs to be an incremental approach. Incremental approach is let's make do with what we have. A lot of government are actually backside now rebuilding their city and waiting for a lot of funds to be accumulated before they start operation. So we needed to start operation with little that we have and try as much as possible to build our city better. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think this is an excellent point to conclude this third and last discussion we had. I want to thank everyone, all the fellows, for a very productive discussion. And I would slowly transition us into the next part of our event, which is the stakeholder consultation. So before we actually jump right into it, just a couple of notes. When you are asking a question or speaking, please share your name and organization affiliation. And if you want to ask a question, raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Unfortunately, due to the time concerns, we will not be able to ask all the questions verbally, but all the ones that will be put in writing in the chat will be taken into account for the UN Habitat report. So yes, raise your hand and you will be unmuted or drop in the chat. Who wants to be the first person to break the ice? Well, while we wait for questions, actually, I'm seeing here some excellent comments. Yes, everybody, please feel free to drop your LinkedIn profiles, and please go ahead and read all the fellows' bios, follow GPODS on social media on all accounts that were shared earlier. Okay, I see that Sunil has raised a hand. So yes, Sunil, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? My name is Sunil Bulidar Shastri. I'm an independent consultant in ocean and environmental governance. First of all, at the risk of sounding pompous or self-important, let me say how pleased I am to see a predominantly young panel here. And secondly, it's also well populated by women. So there's a more than fair share of gender balance in that sense. So I congratulate the organizers on this. I personally abhor any men-only panels, so I'm delighted to see that. Anyway, coming back to the comment, I think I've made the comment in the chat box, but I just thought I would make it loud and clear that 75% of our large mega cities are all coastal. And we somehow, oceans and coasts tend to be out of sight, out of mind issues, unless you're studying them and you know about them. Most of us have visited the coast, and so you know the ocean periphery. We are basically land lubbers, and we really don't have the concept of the size and the shape and the influence that ocean has on us. So I think it is very important that when we have these discussions about resilient cities, we should focus also on how, I mean, the future of these coastal cities is very much in doldrums, because even a 75-centimeter sea level rise is going to, kind of obliterate some of the major cities on Earth. So I think that is a major concern, which all of us should take into account, whether we are interested in ocean issues or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to follow up or comment on this?
Yeah, hi, my name is Asif. I'm calling. I'm actually speaking from Calcutta, India. I'm a consultant in PwC. My concern is that, we talk about future cities, we talk about sustainability, and I'm also blind. But one of the things that I faced a lot in terms of pandemic, just ordering groceries online or using mobile apps or digital channels, that itself was a challenge because it did not integrate universal access. So we're talking about cities, but we're talking about equal infrastructures. But sadly, there was no discussion or conversation on making sure that whatever we are designing in terms of ICT initiatives for the future cities, for the sustainable cities, they also should cater to people with disability, such as people like us. If we, God forbid, if we are confronted with another pandemic, like, we could leverage on IT solutions to get our groceries or to get our day-to-day essential items at our doorsteps without worrying that, oh my God, it doesn't work with my talking software on the phone. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, some of our fellows did speak about lens, a disability lens. So if you guys want to maybe respond to this question or comment.
Mohammed, yes, I think the safety question was addressed before you might have joined. So that was my panel. Hello, I'm Caroline. And in regards to food security, I'm always happy to connect. I dropped my LinkedIn. I'm actually very passionate about that, especially how a lot of the shortages in the systems have been exacerbated through COVID. So happy to connect afterwards. Yes, there were several solutions suggested by my panel, and a lot of them were surrounding, including ICTs and digital technology through a communications lens, which certainly can be leveraged also for communication between disabled persons and food providers, because obviously we need to work with multiple levels of government as well as public-private partnerships in order to address those shortages in food supply chains. And there's of course the question of whether we start local and rely on local and improve those systems, or do we rely more on the global systems? So absolutely, I hear your point. I know Shashank also had something to add.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. So as Asif was saying, right, one of the things that during the points that we were discussing, the fellows brought out were that vulnerable within the vulnerable. So when we are talking about urban poor, we emphasize the point, right? And I completely take that it is not only about the poor, but we did discuss that within the vulnerable, which were the urban poor, there are people from, if you look at it, women, particularly children, and people with disabilities. What you bring out is very interesting about the ICT solutions to it. In addition, the infrastructural issues, and probably the most important ones is the local governance issues with a lens of people with disabilities having a special empathy towards the need of people with the special needs, I think would be one of the key aspects when it comes to rebuilding post-COVID-19. So thank you, Asif.
I'm sorry.
Word of what was it? Dignity. We also talked about incorporating dignity. So definitely keep that word. Yes, Yulia, sorry.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that Suleika, who spoke about people with disabilities in her presentation, also got a chance to respond.
Thank you, Yulia. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure. So I think the technical aspects have been very well covered by Caroline, by Shashank. But what I would like to emphasize is precisely that Asif came and spoke up. And I think we need more people like him coming and bringing the issues to visibility for them, since their experiences are so unique. So I would really like to congratulate Asif for bringing this to our focus. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would like to make a response to Suni. Suni actually mentioned something concerning the ocean, and it's quite very important. And of course, because there's been some consensus in the European Union about investing in oceans and also site rebuilding. But I felt one key thing we're actually lagging around is the literacy. A lot of people do not have literacy about the ocean. This is very, very, very important. And concerning the flooded issue, and because there's climate change now, and of course, we have the ocean moving into the inland, the issue, it's actually been like trying to understand the PODO system in the Netherlands. The PODO system in the Netherlands have actually provided us with a kind of programmatic directions where we could actually learn how to adapt with the ocean and how some city can actually grow into the future by creating PODO systems, and they could be more sustainable.
I was going to say, I don't think anyone addressed Sunil's question. So thank you for that, Zahid. I also think, to add to your point, the literacy and also the participatory data collection, as you mentioned earlier, Zahid, citizens like yourself, Sunil, can definitely begin the dialogue on citizen-based approaches and citizen science in collecting this data and presenting it not just to the government officials, perhaps as a start through the lens of climate action, because the business as usual approach is not working, and it's very intersectional with the area of oceanic governance and environmental governance, but also bringing it to the people and making them more aware of the issue and why people, for example, in New York City should be worried that in a decade, well, maybe not a decade, but maybe in 2 decades, we're going to be underwater. So I hear you, definitely.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else that would like to comment on first or second question, or audience, are there any other questions you would like to ask?
Yeah, I think let me continue with the second question. I'm sorry. Okay. Concerning your question, I've championed a lot of policy or strategies that have actually shaped the programmatic influence of for its influence on disability, incorporating disability into programmatic view. And you could see the case of Uganda, where most of the buildings, the toilet facilities actually make provisions for disabled persons to be able to have access to it. And also that of the IT aspect, where in Nigeria, there's now this IT hubs that actually provide access for disabled people to get trained in form of IT, either you're blind, you're deaf. So I think these are actually vital issues, and we need to really push forward more government officials and at all levels to be able to incorporate disabled people through policy making. And as well, that could actually shape most of the interventions that will support them at the local level.
Thank you very much. So this is my last call for questions. If anybody has something pressing that they would like to ask, please raise your hand or feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, great. Well, in this case, I would like to thank everybody who participated to the discussion. I would like to thank our fellows and our stakeholders and the audience. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. And please make sure to follow GPODS on social media. Links are again below. And yes, thanks again for participating to the Urban Breakfast with UN Habitat, and have a great time of the day wherever you're at.